Hey YouTube, we are back. I am Dr. Ray here with Dr. Pace Newburn, and today we have a special guest, Nurse Adrian RN. She's a phenomenal nurse of many years. She also holds a master's in business administration. Today, she's going to teach us about nursing unions. Why do nurses form unions? What are some of the nuances of forming a nursing union? And some of the things you should do and or look out for if wherever you're working is in a union or considering forming a union. So let's get right into it. But first, Nurse Adrian, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, both of you, Dr. Pace and Dr. Ray, for inviting me to be on your show. And this is always, an exciting topic and one that's a big one. So yeah, my name's Adrian, Nurse Adrian RN. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. I was a labor union organizer for several years and became an RN as a result of becoming a union organizer, actually. And then I left and became a regulatory expert within a union for 10,000 nurses during the pandemic and have an MBA, and I'm an entrepreneur. And like many nurses, am searching for other adventures in life and means to satisfy the need for money, right? And an income and what really serves a greater cause.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. We are so honored that you are here with us today. So I'm going to get started. Our first question is, why would nurses form a union? What's the purpose? What is the intent?
Yeah, and that's a great question, the why, right? And the why is not all that different for any worker, really. So, I came out of healthcare organizing. I organized from housekeepers, dietary workers, lab scientists, pharmacists, nurses, nurse practitioners, interns, and residents within the healthcare spectrum. I've also organized lawyers, DAs, police, not police, but police staff, civil staff. And the why is typically to have some kind of collective power, to have more than just being an at-will employee or be at the mercy of, a manager or a corporation. Oh, we lost somebody. So oftentimes, workers will want to have power on the job. There could be changes that have happened recently. There could be a change of administration, a change of ownership. It could be cumulative long-term issues that have been going on, that have been going unresolved. And there are sometimes when employers do things that create the situation inadvertently. For example, the hospital I worked at, the hospital gave the ICU nurses a $10 raise. And this was in 1999. So this was like a 50% raise, but didn't give the ER a raise. That completely started the union organizing campaign at the hospital that I worked at. And I actually helped organize that hospital, became a nurse, and got a job at that hospital and was very active, involved in the union there. So again, for nurses now specifically, I will say oftentimes there's other issues besides your wages and benefits, hours of work. I mean, it could be, you've got the rotating shifts. It could be management saying, well, we're going to rotate. That was another issue at the hospital, actually, that the ICU, they were saying, well, you got to rotate, you're going to do 2 months days, 1 month nights, something like that. That again was an impetus to organize and take action. So other issues are around licensing. We as nurses have a license. Anyone who has a license has an additional investment. This could be respiratory therapists. It could be anybody who carries a credential as part of their role that they perform in their job. There is a need to protect your license. And oftentimes that need as an individual is going to be very similar to my colleagues. And we're all going to be in the same boat. It's very unusual that one person, among hundreds, is going to be the only one concerned about their license. If it's a staffing issue, if it's a safety issue, if it's, equipment, processes that aren't working in a hospital, that all these things, as we've talked about for a couple of years, en masse about, right, all of those issues can also funnel energy into a unionization drive. Can they all be resolved in a contract? No, they cannot all be resolved in a contract. However, you can set up language in a contract and have certain types of language in committees that help address those issues. And you have a collective means by which to address management versus I'm going to complain to my manager, you're going to complain to my manager, we're all going to complain to the manager, and then guess what happens?
Nothing.
Right. So it's unifying with each other. And the other part that people don't often realize is that when we step back, no matter how we might feel about a union or what our gut reaction or triggers or, might be, let's just look at who has a contract in a hospital. In a hospital or any business, everybody else has a contract, but the frontline staff, the CEO, the vice president, financial officer, every single person who's in the executive arena, C-suite has a contract. Everybody who delivers, equipment to that hospital, those companies, the company Pepsi Cola, whatever it might be that delivers to the vending machines, they have a contract. The pharmaceutical companies have a contract, right? So every manager also, a director, I would say, not a manager, every director also has a contract. And there comes a lot of benefits and perks to these contracts as well. So there's a lot of unspoken things beyond wages. There's forgivable loans for houses. There's huge living stipends, per diem rates, cars, travel budgets. There's, lots of perks, right, that aren't talked about that the C-suite receives from large healthcare companies.
Okay, so with that being said, what are the steps involved in forming a union?
Good question. So typically there's a saying, if I talk to you, one of you, and we're talking about an issue, we're just complaining, right? We bring a third person in, now we can take action, right? Because there's something about that third person, more than three, you've now got some accountability, like, hey, what's the next step? Okay, now let's take some assignments. What it really takes is having some concrete issues, right? It can't be like, I didn't get my vacation, so I want to form a union. It needs to be really concrete that doesn't necessarily have to address every worker, but certainly a large enough number that you can get traction off of it. And then start speaking with people whom you trust. So trust is an important component in a union organizing drive, especially in the very front stages before the campaign. We call them campaigns, are public and known, because union busting is real. It's a multi-hundred millions of dollars business industry every year. So, workers would get together. Like, let's just say I did tele. So we had the biggest department in the whole hospital. We have over 100 nurses. So 1 out of 7 nurses was in tele. I would talk to my friends. Who do I trust? Do I trust my preceptor? And I would want to get the people that are most respected involved. We have a saying in the union, and I don't want to offend anybody, but we would say leaders, not lepers, right? Get the leaders. You want to have people who have followers. Leaders by nature, and you all know this, I'm assuming, certainly you both are leaders in your workplaces that have followers. Whereas a manager has followers by force, right? But leaders are people that are looked up to, they're respected, they're often the preceptors. It might be the person who, does the parties, plans the birthdays, the person who does the social events in the unit, the longer term employees. So you want to have a cross section of the younger, newer nurses, the older nurses, the shifts, covered. So if I'm just on my unit, I would probably pick a couple people that I trust on day shift. Then I'd figure out, okay, who can we trust on night shift that really, we could count on, that's also respected. Because you can have activists in this process, and you'll need those activist people, but they may not always have followers. And so you might actually give them more tasks to do. But the leaders are people that, leaders are people that, they can give you a list of 100 people they know in that hospital and phone numbers. They've got 200 people coming to their kids' birthday parties, right? They've got, they are the ones that are very well respected. And it doesn't always have to be longevity, but often it is. And also you really need to look at a cultural cross-section as well. So once you kind of get your department, a core group, what we call an organizing committee, then you would see, okay, now who do I know in my related units, right? ICU, ER, med surg, right? L&D and OB in those units are are not always so easily connectable. So then you got to go see, well, is anybody transferred over there? Anybody go to nursing school with somebody in these departments? Oh, my cousin works over here. I came out of a hospital where like everybody was related. I mean, it was unbelievable of all levels of staff in that hospital. So it really was, I mean, it was not uncommon that 7 or 8 people in a family would work in my hospital and different levels. So it's very easy to communicate and get things going. But that's an anomaly. It's not always going to be the case, and some people are just apathetic. You might have people that are like, yeah, I've been here since, the dawn of time, but I'm so over it and I don't care. And I'm on the short end of retirement. Right. But those people still often have a reach. So you want to try and appeal to them. So I was really forming that organizing committee, keeping it on the down low. So management doesn't know, and this is important, why trust is very important, because once management gets a wind of it, then, it's going to be an all out union busting assault. And the other part is obviously picking a union, choosing, well, do you want to go with SEIU? Do you want to go with National Nurses United or California Nurses Association in California, their chapter here? Or do you want to go with the American Federation of Teachers, which is also one of the largest nurse unions in the country, or Teamsters or Steelworkers, whatever it could be. I mean, it really doesn't matter. So at some point you may want to interview unions, or there may already be kind of an established, yeah, we want to go with this union. In the hospital I ended up working at, and that I helped on the campaign before I became a nurse, they interviewed, the ER had an organizing committee up to themselves. They went and they interviewed different unions. So I remember going to that meeting and being grilled at somebody's house. So often these organizing committees are called OC, will have house meetings. And that's a really integral part of organizing a union. Everything happens offsite. So, we would task them out. We only met with the ER. We said, okay, who do you know in other departments? Okay, let's set up a meeting in 2 weeks. Who are you going to bring? And we'll be back. And they just kept delivering. So if you keep delivering, the union staff is going to know, okay, they're serious, because it's a huge amount of money to organize workers. It is a phenomenal investment for unions that the current members pay for. So current members subsidize union organizing for new members. That's an important part that a lot of people don't understand. For example, we didn't have any offices or staff in the area, the hospital I ended up working at or organizing. It was 100 miles away from LA. So we rented a house. We all lived in this house, the staff, and then that was our office. So again, I think when things really got ramped up, we had about 6 or 7 staff, full time. We've got phones, cars, overhead. We're printing crazy amounts of material to flyer the hospital. Got lawyers involved. I don't have any clue. I couldn't even give you an average, because I'm thinking of this now, how much campaigns cost, but it is not a small amount of money, and especially to see things through to a contract. You got to get to the election, but then you've got to get a contract. That's a whole other campaign.
Okay, so I just wanted to piggyback off of something.
Yeah.
So you mentioned 2 things I wanted to piggyback off of. First is union busting. For all of our listeners, could you please give us a synopsis or definition on what that is? And also, and the second thing I wanted to piggyback off of is when you said how much it costs in order to, like the upfront cost, even try to unionize in the first place. And that you said that was being paid by members that are currently within a union somewhere else. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
So there is a case, I mean, so let me talk about the expense a little bit to not the ability I can. So, let's say SEIU, I worked for SEIU, the largest union in America. They have gone through various periods of organizing different types of workers. At the point when I was working for them, they were in a very big push to organize healthcare workers and especially nurses in Southern California. And so the members, unions have big conventions. They're usually held every 4 years, and they, pass either if they're going to raise their rates of membership, if they're going to pass certain initiatives of where they're going to focus their energy, what is their political agenda going to be, what do the members want? And this is where all the locals And you think of a local as like a franchise, basically, of a union. They come together and those are elected leaders and they make decisions that impact the entire body. So with that said, our union, SEIU, had come together and said, yeah, we're willing to put X amount of money towards organizing healthcare workers and nurses, and go ahead, go hire a bunch of staff. And that's how I basically got hired. So in 1999, I mean, there was a huge push. The union hired hundreds of new organizers, had an organizing institute, put us through like a 1-year training program, basically, where we worked on 4 different campaigns. So it'd kind of be like being a traveler nurse, but you're going to go work L&D, you're going to go work ICU, you're going to go work ER, you're going to work tele or, rehab or something, really different areas, and get a really good experience, and then kind of figure out, okay, what are you good at? And then that's where you're going to land. So that's how that basically works. Now, there are situations where, and especially in right to work states in the South, I'm familiar with the campaign that we had where it was really past the bucket. It was, hey, we're not going to even be able to afford to put staff down here in this southern city. If you guys really want this, you're going to have to subsidize it. I mean, they literally passed a bucket as the organizing committee grew, and people just put cash. It was like tithing, essentially. And so and I'll get into this later when we talk about how contracts are, how that process of bargaining for a contract works, and striking and all that, because it really depends on where that support is and the budget. So whether or not you can pay striking nurses, whether or not you can pay organizing committee members, replace pay for members who maybe take a day off work a week to be on a bargaining team, or whether there just isn't that funding and they're going to have to work their full-time job and bargain full-time, or however many days their bargaining may happen. Now, union busting, let's talk about that. So union busting is a huge industry. It's estimated to be somewhere around $400 million a year in union avoidance contracts. So just on average, these are typically lawyers or people that are trained in law, come out of HR. So they usually are going to take, it's about $350 an hour. It's not uncommon that one union buster, union avoidance specialist, as they're called, will be $3,000, $2,500 to $3,000 a day. I know because as a union organizer and as a union leader, I was often solicited by the corporation I worked for to come to work for them, to do that very thing internally. The other thing is that these are often external companies and often law firms, or they're kind of offshoots of a law firm. Somebody said, well, I can just make money. I don't have to practice law. I can just do this, and have a couple lawyers, and we just basically work as union busters. The other component of it is that a lot of companies have become very sophisticated about this, and they have brought in-house kind of a sub-organization and created departments, their labor relations department. And oftentimes it's kind of side by side with HR. It doesn't work under HR. It works more laterally straight from corporate. That's the case in almost every large healthcare company right now. So it was interesting because in the company I worked for, the labor relations department, which there was one lawyer, usually it was a lawyer, brought in, they worked next to HR, but they actually didn't work for HR. And it would be very interesting, the tensions that would arise, because these people would work directly for corporate. They would not work for the hospital themselves. And so they had a different agenda than the actual hospital, and they would often conflict with the CEO. So the role of a union avoidance, like for example, a union avoidance company will come in, an employer will say, oh my gosh, my employees are going to organize a union. What do I do? They call HR, they call their lawyers. Oh, we have this company. You've got to call them, bring them on board. You have a meeting with this union avoidance company. They're going to completely scare the crap out of the corporation. I mean, they use a fear tactic because they want the money. It's huge, phenomenal amount of money. And they'll say, well, if you let your workers take over, you're going to be out of a job, blah, blah, blah. This is going to cost you millions of dollars. They're going to run the business out. And again, I'm talking about healthcare, but we could be talking about a manufacturing plant, right? And so there could be different dynamics at play here. But a hospital pretty much has to stay open some way or another. So what these union busters will do is they'll come in, the company, the CEO or whoever will say, okay, yeah, sure, whatever, anything it takes. keep the union out, right? They will spend more money to bust the union than the actual cost of the contract that they will eventually settle with those union members. That's the insane part, because it's never about money, it's about power. It's about having all the power on the planet, right? It's like any power dynamic over time, historically, or anywhere we can look around the planet that's happening. It is about power, right? And having power consolidated with a few people, a small group, those are the leaders, right?
Yeah.
And the horrible part is that these union busters will come in, and the first thing they'll do is okay, tell us who are the leaders, who are the ones organizing this. Okay. And they'll literally have a list on a wall of all the workers, and they'll be mapping it out, and they'll say, okay, who are the managers? We need to meet with the managers of this department. So they'll have these meetings with the frontline managers where they will literally browbeat these people emotionally and make them basically transfer responsibility of the entire campaign to these managers, the frontline managers and directors. Basically, like if your department, like the union drive is coming out of your department, you are the biggest failure on the planet, and we are going to fire you. And before we fire you, we're going to completely rake you over the coals, but we're still going to fire you anyways. I can guarantee those people are always out. But the way they emotionally manipulate the managers is such to me, so unethical, that, which is why I would never be a manager, because I've just seen how they get treated in so many ways, right? But especially in union busting campaigns, it is really horrible. So they basically put it directly on them, like, the level. And so as things ramp up, as say, the desire to unionize and the growth of the organizing committee starts to happen department by department, these managers are just, they're taking it home. I mean, it's unfortunate the kind of pressure we've seen. Managers have, health issues and just completely go bonkers on their workers, on their staff, because of the pressure that they're feeling and what they are being told, which is just all a fallacy. It's just, we all know what middle management, how much power do you have, right? So union busting is a huge, they'll bring them, they'll talk to the managers, then they'll start having what's called captive audience meetings. So they'll bring everybody in an auditorium, there'll be an announcement, everybody there's a mandatory meeting, everybody must attend. You'll go into an auditorium or some kind of room, lecture hall. There will be guards and people that you've never seen before in the hospital in suits. So it's basically like the CIA just showed up, or the FBI, the Secret Service, and the men in black. And you'll see all these people at the doors that you've never seen before. They will close the doors. They'll often lock the doors. They'll tell everybody to turn off their cell phones, I'm sure at this point, this day and age. And then they'll start like a presentation, basically. And they'll make sure they sign everybody in. So it won't be some casual sign in like an in-service. It's going to be like, where's your badge? Sign your name, you've attended, and give us all your information, update your information, because management also wants to make sure they can get a hold of you, because they will go to your house too. This is the interesting part. So yeah, I was in a campaign where the union buster took a helicopter to a person's house that lived in this really remote area in the mountains, because in Southern California, in the mountain areas, some people coming down and they'll work like 4 or 5 shifts in a row, and then they'll go back to their mountain house for 2 weeks or whatever. Yeah, very interesting. So then they'll come in, everybody's sitting there, it'll be very uncomfortable, and then they'll start going through this entire PowerPoint about the union, and the union's a third party. So it'll start with either one of two ways. It'll be the CEO up there kind of looking completely uncomfortable, unlike they ever look, because they're being forced to recite some, manuscript that they don't believe in, about, we're all one big happy family. We understand that we've made a mistake. So it'll either be an apologetic type of approach, or it'll just be the hammer. It'll just be fear, fear, fear. So, it'll be, we're really sorry. We understand we messed up. We understand there's been things that haven't been addressed. We promised we're going to address those. And how we're going to address those is we form these committees that we'd like you to volunteer to be on. Right? That's your red flag. Or it'll be, look, if you join a union, if you form a union, we're going to have to go out of business, You're never going to get a raise. The union's going to break up our family. There's always this concept of family. All of a sudden, when the union comes along, all of a sudden you're all related. I don't know how that happens, but it's this weird phenomenon. All of a sudden you're all cousins just working together. So they'll use that like the union's a third party. When in reality, the union is just workers. It's just, the three of us, we form a union. And so that will continue, and there'll be flyers up. There'll be big giant posters up. Hospitals will pay for billboards outside the hospital along the freeway routes that workers take to go to work. I've organized several religious hospitals, Catholic hospitals. I've had witnessed and had reports of the nuns being involved. I've had workers be told by nuns that they will go to hell if they vote for the union. These are in Catholic hospitals. The extreme emotional manipulation. There is no limit. When I say no limit, there is no limit to the emotional manipulation that will go on in a union busting campaign. It's unbelievable. I grew up in such a union family. I think I was already inoculated by it, by my dad, but people get scared, and then when you see, oh, wow, my preceptors, the boss is also trying to go for the leaders, but the boss has screwed over the leaders for so long. Now they're scrambling. So they're like, we got it. Who's in charge? Who are the preceptors? Who are the charge nurses? We got to get all the charge nurses in a room, and so if you lose the charge nurses, if the management loses the charge nurses and they're in the bargaining unit, they're like maybe a rotating charge, they're in bad shape. It's integral to have the charge nurses involved in the campaign because they're going to be the leaders more often than not.
I want to ask a question before we go on to number 3. So as you're saying all this, it's also true that while they're trying to negotiate and manage this part, they're still running their own unit, right?
Right.
They're still having the double job of running a unit, or as a nurse working the unit, and then come in addition to these mandatory meetings regarding this, that, and the other. So it's really like it's double stress because you're trying to work my shifts. They're trying to work their shifts as nurses, the ones on the staff nurses, and then management. They're trying to, manage their floor. They're going to their daily rounds, their meetings they go to already because of just managing their unit or directing their unit. And then in addition to, there's this. Is that what you're saying? I want to make sure we have an understanding. They have double duty.
Exactly. And you will see the managers start to unravel. You will start to see the managers look very stressed, especially because a lot of nursing managers are women and may have children and have other obligations. And suddenly now you're going to see the managers working till 10 o'clock at night. You're going to see the managers showing up on night. Here's the other thing. All of a sudden management shows up on night shift and weekends. They're rounding like crazy. Hey, it's like, the politicians running for election, right? It's like all of a sudden they're out like kissing babies, shaking grandma's hand, but they're doing it with the workers. And it's so transparent. However, we work in a field that could be considered rather codependent, and people will buy into that attention. And for your viewers later watching this, this is a great book. It's Confessions of a Union Buster, Martin J. Levitt. This is the ultimate book. It's a autobiography that this man wrote, who was a union buster from the late 60s. And at some point he basically looked in the mirror one day and he was like, I'm Satan, I'm the devil. And he had this epiphany and he decided to expose the entire industry. And he gives some really good stories about, we're talking about, the book starts with him saying, my job was to destroy friendships, destroy relationships, destroy trust of workers. And that was my goal. And I was very successful at it. He talks about a campaign. He talks very openly about lying as an integral part of the campaigns, spreading rumors about that there would be like a whole rumor brainstorming session about the leaders, right? There was a great example he gives about them targeting a Black worker who was a leader in a union drive in a factory, and then spreading a lie that this woman had planted a bomb and was having an affair. And so it just destroyed her. I mean, the union, I don't know, I think the union did that. They lost the election. There were charges filed against this company. But in the end, I mean, they had just really done a number on this woman, and really targeted her. So there's, there's racial targeting, there's sexual orientation targeting. There's a huge part of union busting used to be basically spreading rumors that somebody starting the union was gay. That would be a huge, anything to discredit them, right? Like, oh, like they don't go to church. They're whatever, I don't know, they go whatever the dominant religion is in the town or area, they don't do that. They're having an affair or this or that, or they've got illegitimate children. I mean, a lot of these things are not relevant anymore, thankfully. However, the discrediting of the leaders it still happens. It happens in other ways. And I've seen it myself. I have seen it myself. With workers in different, not so much in nursing campaigns, but in other groups of workers organizing, where they basically, management will take something that they know may or may not even be a fact, or it may actually be a fact about a worker, and then they will just leak it out. I mean, so again, when I say there's no limits, there's no limits.
Mudslinging.
It is on a huge level, and it comes with a lot of money. Meanwhile, here's like these workers, right? And the unions are not I mean, yes, unions have lots of money, but that money is highly accounted for. And there's a whole other IRS like set of laws for unions and how money is spent. So there's nowhere ever going to be the amount of money that a union spent that the companies will spend to keep the union out, to keep the workers from forming a union. Never. And it's phenomenal. I mean, that's why I think this 400 million a year amount is really low. I feel like it's got to be over $1 billion, but so many companies have in-house labor relations. They don't even have to count that. They're actually required to report union busting, but they don't. The IRS allows them just to not do it. And when we talk about like, why would companies not want a union? Well, let's look at some numbers here in healthcare profits. So health insurance and healthcare industry together is, let me see if I can do this addition. So we're talking about over $50 billion a year. The insurance industry in 2019 reported $8.2 billion in their fourth quarter, $35.7 billion in the full year of 2019, right? Mostly that growth came from the Medicare Advantage program. Healthcare profits in the healthcare industry during the pandemic. So 2019, 13.9 billion, 2020, 15.4 billion, 2021, 17.3 billion. So during the pandemic, nobody lost money. There was a consolidation. A lot of small hospitals and organizations may have lost out, but the big players kept on getting bigger. Earnings are expected to grow by 21% by 2025, right? So then we're talking about that 17.3 billion figure growing by 20%. So now we're going to be over $21 billion. This is not small change, right? And so this continued expansion and changes in healthcare are going to mean even more sophisticated union busting techniques, because now we've got Amazon getting into healthcare. We've got Walmart getting into healthcare. We've got changes in the whole delivery system of healthcare, besides the fact that healthcare is imploding. I mean,
yes,
it's imploding in general, right? But this is a time when you would think, wow, let's make it more attractive to be an employee. Let's make healthcare as a profession more attractive. Let's, not spend the taxpayer money. So let me back up. Let me bring up an issue here that's a big issue that there's been some initiative from the United States Senate on. In May, there was there was a bill that was discussed, and I don't know how far it got. It was basically to stop the use of taxpayer money through Medicare that goes to the hospitals that is then used for union busting. And this is something I talk about a lot, because sometimes there's ways to get through to people where people may be anti-union, but they may think, oh, yeah, that doesn't make sense, that my tax money that's going to pay for Medicare for my grandma's medication and healthcare is then being funneled and siphoned off to that 400 million that's used for union busting. This is a huge issue that really is getting more and more attention. So, but we know companies, like don't pay taxes, right? So Amazon didn't pay taxes in 2018 at all, right? 2017 tax reform laws basically took out about half of the taxes of, half the taxes. So the statutory corporate income tax rate went from 35% to 21%. So 14% drop and tons of new loopholes, right?
Mhm.
So there's just so many ways that companies are avoiding paying taxes and saying, hey, let's just use some Medicare dollars to do union busting.
And I was thinking that when you mentioned the profit numbers, I said, I think it's even higher because when you look at the largest corporations, as we all know, pay the least in taxes in terms of percentage of, on the revenue that they generate. So on top of that, you think about all the different ways that they save on taxes, write-offs, et cetera. And
All right, so we have private healthcare, right, which is for profit and not for profit. So you have religious not for profit, and then you've got not profit community hospitals, which mostly have been eaten up by corporations, and then you've got the for profit players, right? You've got the HCAs, the Sutters, and then you've got the very large nonprofit religious players, Catholic Healthcare West, which is Dignity Health, which is now Common Spirit, Catholic Healthcare East, so. These companies that are nonprofit are not paying any property tax. They do not pay any property tax on top of massive loopholes. When we just look at the valuation of the property taxes that these hospitals are sitting on, I worked at a hospital that was a square mile of prime real estate near the ocean in Southern California.
that alone.
Right. I mean, there's tons of them. The Providence system, for example, all along the West Coast, sitting on, blocks and blocks and blocks of the most valuable real estate in Los Angeles. So that money, again, these are bigger questions, obviously, right, about taxes, how tax money is used, what taxes are paid, and then how that money gets siphoned back to really beat back workers, right? And ironically, because people don't, I'm sure you've heard this, people are always shocked that healthcare workers don't have health insurance.
Yeah.
We don't get health, like what, they think it's like, I work at the seed store, so I just must get some extra seed that falls out of the bag or something, but we don't get that. And that's a subject of bargaining. That's a mandatory subject of bargaining, are the benefits and working conditions. So again, for any healthcare workers to have to even pay, and that is a huge issue in organizing. Because the valuation of that, right? If you're paying $600 a month for your health insurance, and you're able to move that to the employer to have them pay for it in a union contract, well, you've just gotten a raise just from that alone, right? You've just gotten $6,000 more in your pocket, or times however many people you're paying for. This is why this is why we're seeing the Kaiser workers striking as well. This is a huge issue for them. As well as their workload and everything else going on in their pay. But, Kaiser is fully funded. I worked for a large nonprofit Catholic system. Our healthcare was fully funded. I have never paid for healthcare in my life. I've never paid for healthcare in my life. From working for a union company that before that was union, and then working for a union hospital. So, I mean, that's that alone, right? Even if you're only getting a few dollars a year raise or percentage, but I mean, we are in a time right now where inflation is 8%, the dollar is losing value, everything is going up in price. If people aren't getting an 8%, 8.5% raise annually, you're going backwards anyways.
Yeah. Because
that's the cost of goods, and the cost of debt is going up. Everything is going up. So I digress a little bit in the economics part. But I always am amazed at workers. I just came back from Spain, and every time I'm in Europe, there's some big strike looming or something's going on. When I was in France, the Eiffel Tower was on strike. Workers get it, right? And then in Europe, they understand their power. it's understanding that collective power. We have this individual libertarianism in America of like, I am my own solo producer and person and manifester. But in reality, I'm going in, I'm clocking in somewhere. I'm just manifesting wealth for somebody else.
Mhm.
Right. And unless I'm joining and collaborating with some other people, and we then can create an organization for change, I'm at the mercy of somebody else that's writing me a check. And it's how do you harness that power collectively? Because that is the big fear of any company, is the collective power of people. I mean, that not only just in withholding your labor, but I can tell you when I was a union rep, I represented many hospitals in addition to being an organizer. And there's a grievance process that's used for violation of the contract. I very rarely use that because I would just have the workers very well organized. And I would say, okay, well, who's going to do the march on the boss? And they'd be like, okay, great. And we just had them trained that, if there's something goes down and you want to address it and management won't meet and they want to ignore and go hide in their office, well, then you get 20 workers and you go march on the boss. You call the local press. We empowered the workers to do all this. We trained them how to do this. They'd call the press, they'd do their own press releases, they would talk about the issue at hand, and then they would go show up outside the CEO's office. And these people would be terrified because these people are not used to having their power challenged. I mean, it's like any other situation of an absolute totalitarian power, right? Where it's like, what, I've seen that look in their face where they just can't even comprehend that their authority is being challenged. Right.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm learning a ton.
It's a big topic. I mean, it's a big topic and I'm very passionate about it. I don't have all the answers, but I believe in people. I believe in the collective power of people in any situation. We are always stronger together than we are divided.
I totally agree. So I can go down a rabbit hole with that, but I totally agree.
Right.
Our next question is the hot topic about strike nursing. Why do nurses eventually strike, particularly when forming a union?
Sure. And again, the answer to that is really the same for all workers. So with the specific nuances of what nurses may want in a contract or maybe dealing with that's putting lives at risk, their lives at risk, their patients' lives at risk, and or their license. So a strike can happen. So there's a couple reasons why workers may strike. So let me start at the very beginning. You could have a process where workers are organizing a union. There could be an election. They win the election and the boss refuses to recognize the union. They refuse to bargain. They say, we're not even going to bargain at all. We refuse to recognize you. Or it could be a situation where the workers say, we want recognition without an election. And this does happen and it's very effective. And when you go this route, I would say you have a huge amount of power where workers will strike to be recognized. They'll say, you know what, we don't even want to deal with an election. We don't want to deal with the National Labor Relations Board. We are going to form our own organization and we're going to strike until you recognize us. Now that's rarely used. More often than not, it's going to go to an election. And then from there may be rallies or pickets that go on before an election, but typically things are very focused on getting to every single worker and making sure that it's like every voter, right? You're trying to get to every voter to have a conversation about, hey, how are you going to vote? What are your issues? Are you going to join us? Are you anti-union? And there's a whole numerical rating system that goes on. It's a 1 through 4 system. So striking. So let's just say now we're recognized. You've had an election. You've won by a large majority. You've won by, say, 70% of the workers. That's a good majority. The boss should be very scared and the workers should feel very empowered. You're bargaining, you're meeting with the boss, you're negotiating, you have your bargaining team that you've elected of your colleagues. Now bargaining's going nowhere. They're basically just meeting, which is all they're required to do by the National Labor Relations Act, but they're not actually coming to any agreement and they're basically flipping the workers the bird. And that becomes apparent over time. Or they'll just hand, some template of a contract over that gives all the power to the boss, no power to the workers. It'll be like, a 50-cent raise. And it'll sometimes it will just go so far to like slap you in the face basically and be offensive about it, which is not a good thing for them to do. And so now the workers may say, okay, we need to get attention of the company. Because our ultimate power as workers is to withhold our labor, right? This is what's happening right now in mass and healthcare. Nurses are saying, I'm withholding my labor. Bye, I'm out. I've myself have left bedside, no plan on returning. But we've all done it kind of on our own, right? So the workers will decide, they'll talk to each other. Now again, you're going to have representatives from every single department, every shift. Those are your organizing committee. They basically become a bargaining support team. And then you have a smaller bargaining team, maybe 5 to 10 workers, 10 at the most, I would say. So you start having meetings, you start having general meetings or general communication to all the workers. You say, here's the issues. This is what's happened so far. So you make sure everybody's educated. We need to escalate things. We need to take it up a notch. So let's do a picket. So usually a picket will happen. That's not a strike. Everybody goes to work. It's just a 2-hour event. Try to get some press because you want to leverage. You want to put pressure on the boss, right? So the bargaining, the way that you leverage the employer is, you imagine you're at the fair and you're in that room that's closing in. You've got to make the walls close in on the boss, and you've got to leave them no way out. And so it can be many approaches to that. The strike is one of them. The publicity of a strike. It could be going to the shareholders. So the ultimate, and it could be like a close-end strike. So it could be a defined period. We're going to go on strike for 4 days. We're going to do a 1-day strike. Now, typically replacement nurses are purchased in 4-day periods. And so oftentimes a union will say, we're going to do a 3-day strike or a 2-day strike, because they know that the boss has to purchase the units of replacement staff in a 4-day increment. I mean, usually it's a minimum 4 days. So then they will lock out the workers, and that then makes them look horrible, because now they've locked out the nurses who said, we're willing to go back to work. We only wanted to strike for 2 days, right? Or 4 days or 3 days or whatever it may have been. Oftentimes we would organize our strikes around holidays. So we would just wait. We'd say, okay, well, let's just wait it out till 4th of July. Let's wait it out till Labor Day or Memorial Day or Christmas. The hospital I worked at, it just happened to work out that many nurses had never had Christmas off for 20 years before organizing a union. And they were more than happy to go on strike for 2 weeks at the Christmas holiday and then force every single manager and exempt employee to work the entire holiday season. And so you also want to create pain, because if the managers start buckling, and saying, hey, I'm sick of this. I have worked because of the union organizing drive and you guys lying to us. I've had to work every holiday. I've missed vacations. My husband's about to divorce me. I missed my kids' graduation, birthday parties. I'm done. Right. So sometimes enough managers will just cave and say, we're not doing this anymore. Like, we're trying to do budgets, manage our units, and you guys have us in this 2-year campaign of, hell. And so oftentimes that will cause like an implosion inside that then will cause enough pressure to have management come back to the table. Oftentimes it won't be in the very, very large systems, because they'll just bring in other managers. They'll just ship managers in. You'll start to see managers come in that are like, oh, hi, I'm just helping your manager and I'm a manager at this hospital. They're a union buster. They've been brought in because your manager's buckled, and your manager's buckling and is perceived as a weak link. That's exactly what happens. And everybody who watches this should listen to that sentence again. But listen to that sentence again and pay attention if you're in a union organizing campaign. So the workers have to give it in a hospital situation. You are required to give a 10-day notice. You can't just go out and strike, any day you want. There's notifications that go to Federal Mediation and Conciliation Services, which is a free service of mediation provided by the federal government. They will typically come in prior to this to ask for bargaining sessions. Now, the employers are not bound to anything in either of the unions to deal with the FMCS. Now, they are brought in, they're notified, and they'll say, hey, can we sit down? Can we talk about this? Can we have some bargaining sessions? they'll try and talk some sense into the employers. But again, these huge corporations could care less. They already know what they have planned, and they will do whatever it takes. So that's in a nutshell, why nurses would strike. Now, oftentimes, once you have a contract, you have a no strike, no lockout. So you are prohibited from striking once you have a contract, typically. That's typical language that's accepted as part of a union contract. So it's going to be in that open period. Here's the other caveat of why nurses would want to strike between that period of having the election and while they're bargaining for the contract, because you have a 1-year period. The employer in 1 year can then decertify, make a campaign to decertify the union if there is no contract in place, meaning they can initiate among the anti-union people, get enough cards signed, 30% of the cards, signatures of the workers that are eligible to vote, to trigger another election to get rid of the union, or another union can come in. So let's just say, I'm just going to use the union before. So let's just say SEIU. We voted for SEIU. We go a year. We don't have a contract. National Nurses United says, hey, we represent every other group of workers in this hospital system, but that one that SEIU has, or Teamsters has. So we're going to go talk to those workers and say, hey, we can help you get a contract faster than the union you're with can. And you can vote with us and we can trigger an election. But it'll be a 3-way election, because what'll happen is the boss will get on the ballot. It'll be like, keep the current union, vote for this union B, or no union. So it becomes very confusing in the ballot. And so this is why it's very, very important, if you're organizing a union, that you have that long range vision. Okay, we are going to see this through to the contract. Whatever it takes, we are seeing this through to get the contract that we deserve. And so that could be a long period.
So that's the perfect segue for the next question. So when you're working through that process and you're forming your union, or working on forming your union, what are some key things to keep in mind in doing so?
Inoculation is very important. It's very important to reach all your coworkers, let them know what to expect. Let them know, hey, you're going to get called into a one-on-one meeting. They're going to try and make you cry. I mean, just imagine the units that we've all worked on, right? There's all of us who are probably, I'm assuming, the strong personalities on the unit, right? And then there's the people who are like milquetoast, who you're not sure why they're a nurse. You're like, they cry, they run, they cry easily. They're like, hey. You're like, I don't know, should I do, and I was a tele nurse. So those nurses were oftentimes the nurses who their patients are going to code, because they were scared to talk to the doctors. Right. And you're just like, so you've got those people who are just going to run when you say boo. And then you've got people that are kind of like laissez-faire. They're kind of detached, oh, union, or they have some idea about unions. Oh, those are for old people, or unions are a thing of the past. There's a whole mythology about unions that I've been hearing for the last 30 years that has no basis in any reality. Oh, unions were a good thing at one point. Well, why were they good, and why wouldn't they be good now? What's going on now that's so good? What do you have? So inoculation is really important, and it's important to have people understand that the union is them, that everybody is a puzzle piece of that greater body of the union. Right? It's like everybody is a bolt on the ship, and that ship has got to leave port in the election, and it's got to arrive at a contract, and it's got to arrive with people being stewards, people stepping up. It's not, it was different for me because I was union staff, and then I came to work at the hospital. I actually had represented as a union. So people really saw me in these two roles. It was a very unique situation. But you have to really see yourself as a worker, like, hey, am I ready to step up and be a union steward? Am I ready to help defend other people? Right. And so again, that's the thing that people should expect. And they should also be putting money away, because if you're going to go on strike, you're going to need some money. And so that's also a good thing to start telling people, hey, you might want to work some overtime and, pick up a few hours here, put some money away every month. If you can, because, we may go to a strike, and people should be realistic about that. It could go to a strike. It could go, some people are going to cave right at, like, my manager pulled me in the office, I'm freaking out. But then there's those people who that happens to, and something snaps in them, and they're like, what? I'm furious that this has happened. And those are the people that will be the gold and the diamonds in the campaign, because they'll go around and tell everybody like, hey, I was anti-union and then this happened. Like they weren't kidding. Like they pulled me in and made up some bull crap, fear tactic. And so my area of expertise, I was always brought in at kind of the end of a campaign when there was a group of workers who were really anti-union and they needed somebody to convert them. And that was my area of expertise. So I was like the anti-union like SWAT team. And I have converted the most anti-union workers in this country that I have, people I have, but sometimes it's a very creative technique. It might be just getting invited to like somebody's birthday party and being out of the hospital, being in a different environment where you're more relaxed and have a conversation. Forming a union means you're going to be pushing on those extrovert buttons and be talking to each other and communicating with each other and holding the trust of each other and willing to give and take. Because my issues that I have in tele or step down are not going to be the same issues in NICU or ER, right? And so I need to say, hey, I'm going to fight for my brother and sister's issues. They're going to fight for mine. And that's how you come together with like what the language will be in your contract pretty much.
Actually, that was a good segue into the last question that I have is who develops the terms for the union? Because I was thinking, like you mentioned, and nowadays everything is so hyper individualized, but different units may have different preferences based on what's going on their particular floor or unit, that may not be relevant to other floors.
Right. Well, OR, you're going to have on call and pack you OR, certain departments, and then you're not going to have any call in other departments, for example, or hours of work. How many hours can you work somebody in the OR? That was a big issue. That's a big issue in a lot of hospitals. Or is cath lab got to work on weekends? Is CVOU going to work? Is a unit going to be Monday through Friday? That's Monday through Friday now. Is it going to be in the contract that they can never change? So, or that has to be renegotiated with the employees. Or is it pension, whatever it might be. So basically, once there's an election, so now you've gone from an organizing committee and the leadership structure of that, those people often will convert to the bargaining team, but there will be another election that's going to be representing an election for the bargaining team members. And then, those bargaining team members may represent multiple departments, and some departments they don't even know about. Because you may have really small departments of 4 or 5, nurses or workers. And so it's really important that they get out there and start talking to people. So then the union staff will meet with the bargaining team and might be just a general meeting of the workers and say, here's, some templates and mandatory subjects of bargaining. So anything that impacts wages, benefits, working conditions, hours of work. So, again, it's going to be like, what's on call pay? What are the minimum pays? What are your step raises going to be every year? So for example, the hospital I worked at, there was a lot of longevity, a lot of nurses over 25 years. They wanted a 25-year step, a 20-year step. So we put a step system in, because prior to that, it was just literally, I swear on my mother's grave, you could only get the top point system on the evaluation if you had donated to the hospital. So if you had not donated to the Catholic Church, you could not get the highest raise possible right off the top. That was just an unspoken rule. And this is, when they had the United Way matching kind of giving corporate campaigns that they used to do. I don't know if they still do those, but that was like 20 years ago. So instead of like these merit-based raises or willy-nilly and nobody knew what anybody was making, now you establish a grid. Everybody knows what everybody's making. If you know the years of service somebody has, you know what they're making, and that makes it all equal. And then you have steps across. So for ours, for example, was 5% across. It was 5% across from each step. Like say, for example, we had a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year step, and then we had a 7 year, I think at 11, a 17, 23. Was 5% there. So you would get 2 raises if you hit that year, because you'd get your annual raise, which was like 4% or 5. And then you would get that bump on those years where you'd hit the benchmark of your years of service. And then we also had, so that's one thing. And then so there's a whole wage analysis that happens. So the employer, and when bargaining starts, is required to hand over all of their financials that are requested from the union. So there are these, like, we had these whiz kids from like MIT and Cornell that were just amazing. And they would crunch all the numbers. What's the profit and loss statement for the hospital? Because they're always going to say, oh, we're broke. But look, we're making $37 billion a year, right? So there's some analysis that happens on like, well, what is the pie? What is the pie we're going to ask for? What's realistic with this hospital? And then depending on the number of workers, you're averaging out salaries. Now, again, when a union first is established, people are going to be all over the place on salary. And so this is what the boss is really pissed about, is they know what's the first ask going to be, bring everybody up to a minimum standard, and then some kind of to scales is what we call it. So that's a huge expense in the beginning of a contract for an employer, always, because you might have somebody making $18 an hour, and with the same years of service, somebody making 28, and you want the scale to be 35. Right. So like, for example, when it was actually 2 contracts in, it was the first contract when I started working, which was the 3rd contract of the hospital. We got huge raises because somehow they had not brought people up to scale. They were still hiring people below scale. And some of us got really huge raises on that contract, the first year of the contract. So again, you're going to have floating. So we, for example, had no floating. Basically, we had grids, we had clusters. It was like one other unit. That was it. We could not be made to float to med surg. We only went to our other tele unit. ICU did not come to tele, only the step down patients. That was it. We didn't even have to go to ICU or ER. If we wanted to, we could go, and it was task only, but then we also got a bonus. So we got $10 more an hour if we floated, and only to do task. Like me gracing your unit with my presence, you're going to pay me $10 more an hour, and I'm going to be basically a CNA and your runner. And so also like training language, benefits, days off, how much PTO are you going to accrue, how much sick time, the expense of all your benefits, vision, dental, health insurance, whether or not you're going to have a stipend for education, like Kaiser has, it's $3,000 or $5,000. What are the terms of all of that? The grievance process, how are you going to protest things? Could be safety. Like a big issue in the last contract that I bargained at my hospital was safety committee, because we were having huge safety issues. And this was in end of 2019 in August when we settled that contract. Like every hospital, things were really escalating around safety. So all of that gets chewed on, and there's a lot of discussion that happens among the members, right? And people are very idealistic, and you start to become realistic about what is going to be attainable, and that's a union's job. Basically, as union staff, we're coaches. We're not the players on the field, we're the coaches, and we say, okay, here's what's realistic, but go for it. If you guys think you can go for it, like we'll get behind you. But you got to really figure out, like, what are the things that are going to impact everybody, like health insurance, hours of work, what's the payday, payroll errors. Like in my hospital, it was a big issue, and they used to have a business office right there that would cut checks. They centralized everything, but it was like 48 hours. If they made a payroll error, they had to cut a new check in 48 hours. And they would try to fight that. No mandatory overtime, no callback, an order of flexing, an order of floating. So was it going to be reverse seniority or by seniority base, or was it going to be by just a rotation? And we had in the contract, every unit got to vote. So some units voted they wanted seniority, other units said we want to rotate. So those are the kind of things that that you can have in a contract. They could have like 40 sections. It really can be your contract is basically your work Bible. That is a thing that every worker should understand what that is. Because if you don't have a contract, all you have are whatever your state laws are. And that might not be much, depending on
especially here in Tennessee.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to go ahead to our last question. And you've already kind of alluded to this earlier, but and control seems to be the the common theme in this whole topic we're talking about.
Mhm.
But why don't employers like unions for employees?
Yeah, power,
Mhm,
power, power and control. It's
mhm,
power and control, and it's seen as a burden to have to actually deal with the minions. It's a burden to deal with the workers, right? We don't want to even take time out of our precious stockholding day to have to address workers. And, because when you think about it, how in a hospital, for example, all the moving parts, right? So
mhm.
if a decision comes down, like let's say you've got an organization that's got 50 hospitals, 10 of them are union, 40 of them aren't. Well, if you make some structural decision in the corporation, you can execute that in 40 of the hospitals, no problem, overnight. Today, payday is now Thursday instead of Friday, and we've now cut your wages by $2 or whatever it
Wow.
might be. We've got rid of all the CNAs. We're not, whatever it might be, equipment, anything. However, those union hospitals, they have to go negotiate. And that means that they're going to be delayed in rolling out things. And they're going to have to deal with it. And it may not work out. They may not come to agreement. So again, it is control and power. And this is when you start looking at the money, the funneling of wealth in this country, whether it's healthcare or any other industry, like Dollar General, the amount of money Dollar General spent on union busting, right? And this is a company that makes tens of billions every year as a company, right? We talk about Amazon not paying taxes in 2018. That their workers in the warehouse have double the rate of injury of all warehouse workers because the pressure and workload they're putting on people. Yes, I mean, just look at what's going on in these hospitals right now. One person in an ER, no staff. Is there a pharmacist on site? All these factors, right? This is where, and oftentimes in pharmacies are really interesting. Oftentimes a pharmacist will be covering multiple hospitals on night shift, not
Mhm.
have no break. It's completely, unethical and sometimes illegal, right? But they will get away. These hospitals are getting away with so much right now, as evident by the profits that they're making. There really isn't any other real logical reason. And I will tell you something, in the hospital I organized and eventually worked at, on 3 occasions, just because of bargaining, we discovered that people in the C-suite were embezzling significant amounts of money from the company
I believe
that
it.
they had no idea. And the math wasn't mathing when we would go to bargaining and we'd be in these fights for the company. And they're like, no. And we're like, no, we have smarter people than you doing numbers, and it's like, this person's from Harvard. I mean, they would just, like let our math person go geek out with your math person and they're going to work it out. And they'd come back, oh, the CFO embezzled $500,000 or $3 million. And this was just in a small, not a big hospital system. It's like a 2-hospital little, system of a big corporation. But so there are benefits to unionization for the communities and everybody involved, and even the organization, but they just they don't see it. But it's often better for patients, because then the patients have a means by which to have some influence in the hospital too, because more often than not, those workers are coming out of the community as well, unless it's, everybody's driving 2 hours in or something. So having a say in healthcare and for patient safety is a huge issue. And again, when you look backwards at that, that's another reason why healthcare organizations do not want unions, because right now the American public has no idea how unsafe it is.
Mhm.
They have no idea what is really going on, and it's getting bad.
Mhm.
And the workers have no recourse. But if you're unionized and you have collaboration and you have collective, power, then at least you can go to the press. You can speak freely without retribution. You can organize the community around these issues of healthcare equity and healthcare justice. In the absence of that, we just move with our feet and we leave.
Okay, all right. This has
Thank
been
you.
a great topic to discuss on unions. you have provided us some great, or us or me specifically, some great insight about the whole process from beginning to end. And we greatly appreciate you coming on and spending your Sunday afternoon with us. And Dr. Ray, any finishing things you want to say before we go?
No, Nurse Adrian, that was phenomenal. I learned so much during your presentation. I greatly appreciate it. And it's given me a whole new outlook. And yeah, it's given me a whole new outlook. And I was always pro-union. It's just in the area where I typically practice, there just aren't many of them. But to our listeners, I encourage you, if this is something that you're thinking about, to please look into it. And also, Nurse Adrian, for our viewers, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, how can they reach you or where can they find you?
The best thing is to follow me on Instagram and message me there, or nurseadrianrn@gmail.com. And, just hit me up on my YouTube channel, but Instagram or Gmail is the best way. And again, I'm just going to plug this book, if you can find it, Confessions of a Union Buster. If you read this book or read a chapter in it, it's really hard to, I would say this is the book for all the replacement staff. A couple excerpts out of that will be pretty eye-opening. But I really appreciate you both. Thank you so much for all your amazing content and collaboration and fellowship. And this has been awesome. And I look forward to, more collaboration in the future and the growth of your channels. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So we're going to close this out for today. And if you want to follow us on, of course, our TikTok, our YouTube, and our Instagram, it is @Nursing Dynamics on all 3 platforms. Also, as we always piggyback our Amazon storefront, you can see that in the upper corner in the banner where you can go find things that we have vetted for nursing school and beyond. If you want to see what we think is important for nursing school and things that you think you could use in terms of NCLEX prep, anatomy and physiology, just general courses like that, then definitely visit our Amazon storefront. But until then, next time, you all take care.
Thank you.